Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to our LinkedIn Live session. Today, we are diving into the future of DevOps with Aiden, the world's first DevOps Copilot. I'm Tero, Vice President of Growth at OpsVerse, and I'm joined in by my colleague today, Naveen Pai. He's the Head of Engineering at OpsVerse. Hey, Naveen, how's it going?
Hey everyone, thanks. Yeah, doing great. Yeah.
Yeah, we're halfway through the week, so all right, Leah. So before we dive in, let's start by getting to know each other a bit better. We'd love to know where you are joining us from, what role you play in your team. Are you a DevOps engineer, an SRE, a developer, or in a leadership role? Drop your answers in the chat. Yeah, and here is a fun question to begin with, right? If you have the power to snap your fingers and instantly fix one DevOps challenge, what would it be? Right? Would it be is it incident response times, streamlining deployments, or maybe simplifying toolchain complexity? Let us know in the comments. We're curious to hear your thoughts. Okay. So our session today has a very simple flow. We will start with the story behind Aiden, dive into how it transforms DevOps workflow, and then go straight into the action with a live demo, right? Which you all have been waiting for. So, and stick around for a Q&A at the end. We'll reserve 15 minutes for Q&A. So stick around for that. All right. So why we built Aiden, right? That's one question we want to begin with today. And so imagine this, right? You are in the middle of a production incident at 2 a.m. Your pager goes off. You need to juggle multiple tools. At OpsVerse, we call it the tool stacks, right? Where you have to juggle between multiple tools. And on an average, we see like developers using 10 to 12 tools. Figure out the root cause of the problem and deploy a fix, all while keeping the downtime minimal. It is stressful, chaotic, time-consuming, and far too common, right? I don't want to use that word, but it is far too common. So at OpsVerse, we have lived these challenges firsthand. Over the years, we have seen how DevOps team, the backbone of modern engineering, are being stretched thinner and thinner. And that's when the question hit us. What if there was a way to lighten the load? Right? The question sparked the idea of Aiden, and we launched Aiden about a year ago, and just recently announced the public launch of Aiden 2.0. So what is Aiden, right? Aiden, just to summarize in a simple way, it would be Aiden is your DevOps Copilot that helps with every stage of DevOps. Aiden is not just another tool, it's a game changer. It's like having a teammate and an AI teammate, right? An extra set of hands with a brilliant mind on call 24/7. Aiden learns your workflows, handles repetitive tasks, empowers you to focus on what really matters, that is building amazing product. So whether you are a DevOps engineer automating deployment, an SRE handling incidents, or a developer focused on debugging, Aiden adapts to your needs. For instance, an SRE can rely on Aiden to identify root cause of an incident in seconds, saving precious time during an outage, right? Imagine, right, from an alert firing to finding the root cause to getting the fix, all done before you even finish a cup of coffee, right? So that's pretty cool to have. That's pretty cool to have, right? So Aiden isn't just one size fits all solution. You can customize it to align with your team's workflows and policies. The best part, you don't need to learn a language or platform. You just talk to Aiden in plain, simple English, and it gets the job done. So with that, without any further ado, let's show you how Aiden works, right? This session, like we mentioned, is more than a demo. It's a glimpse into the future of DevOps. We'll show you how Aiden can transform the way you work, solve your toughest challenges, and free you from to focus on what really matters, that is building and innovating. Also, please keep your questions coming in. We will shortly answer as many as we can, and we will also will be sending you emails post webinar with all the questions and answers. So without any further ado, Naveen, my man, take it away.
Thanks so much, Thero. Let me quickly share my screen and we can get started. All right. Yeah, I don't really like Thero mentioned, like we'll actually spend a lot of time today doing a demo of the product itself. But like broadly, I think like when we started off Aiden, right, it's pretty much like Thero mentioned, it comes up as a spark, right? And I think across the world, generative AI and LLMs in general have created that sudden urge in people to like try to solve a whole bunch of problems with AI, right? And a lot of these things, like especially for us, because we are a company that is built by DevOps engineers for DevOps engineers, right? And even if you go on our website, I think our catchphrase has always been DevOps plus Gen AI equals no ops, right? And that's something that we always wanted to have DevOps engineers focus on what adds value to the organization, rather than like whether it's babysitting your observability stack, or it's like trying to figure out what different tools you're using to like debug an issue, or like just trying to keep things up and running all the time, right? So that's why like we came up with this hypothesis very early on with Aiden, saying that we believe that the future of DevOps is going to be engineers and Gen AI agents working in tandem, right? Now, what does that actually mean, right? It means that while there's a lot of this talk of like how Gen AI will replace engineers, the way that we look at it is like empowering engineers, right? Empowering our SREs, empowering our DevOps engineers, empowering dev teams to perform at a level that they were not able to before, allowing them to then focus on what adds value, whether it's like value to the business, whether it's what adds value within their team, or whether it adds value in personal growth as well, right? And we kind of wanted to look at Gen AI when we started talking about Gen AI. It came up very, very early on, right? I think pretty much like we were the first movers in the space of like trying to tie in Gen AI and DevOps. And I tell people often, right? I think the very first launch of the Chat GPT API was in December of 2023, right? And I think like around Feb is when we started talking about, hey, since we are in this business of like making lives of DevOps engineers easier, we should like start exploring it. And that's why like very early on, right, on Feb 28, 2023 is when we did that initial commit for Aiden, right? Now obviously it doesn't mean that what we have today is like something that's like we built over the last month, right? But Aiden is something that's actually taken 2 years of work. It's like 2 years of learning for us. It's been 2 years of us trying to stay at top of like whatever is happening in the world of Gen AI, trying to fine tune based on feedback that we have gotten from customers, whether they're like beta customers, whether they're like external entities that have tried to use Aiden. And over time, like what it's allowed us to do is like build a system that we believe adds a lot of value within your organization off the bat itself, right? So when we were building Aiden, like the natural question to ask was like, how do we actually tackle this problem, right? It's very nice to say everyone talks about how AI and field X is going to be a game changer, right? But when we're talking specifically about DevOps, right, I think there's a lot of specific things that come into play. A very common example that I give people is like, let's say that you're asking a Gen AI system or an LLM to create a machine for you, right, an EC2 instance or something like that. And the difference between one character being off, right, where it chooses to make an R instance instead of a T instance, right? It's like literally one character difference, but the cost implication of that can be very high, right? Which is not really true when you're talking about a lot of other domains where Gen AI excels, right? So when we started building Aiden, we kind of understood that it is actually important for us to like bound what we are building out specifically for the use cases that DevOps engineers see on a daily basis. And then when we started talking more and more, we started realizing that, hey, like when we talk about Aiden, right, it should actually be just another teammate, right? We know that most teams work best not when you have like one individual brilliant person within your team, but when you have like n people who kind of are able to like have each other's back, each of them specializing in different things, while also like specializing, being able to like depend on each other, right? So that's why when we built out Aiden, a core principle that we had was to build out Aiden as a system that is internally composed of multiple collaborative agents. But at the same time, when you communicate with it externally, you think of it as just another teammate, right? So you would talk to Aiden the way you would talk to any other teammate within your team. And Aiden internally actually figures out how to do things for you. But internally, the way that Aiden is built is it makes use of like multiple agents under the hood. So without much further ado, we'll actually get into the demo for Aiden. Like I said, like we have like a bunch of building blocks that we'd like to talk about today, right? And like when we talk about some of these, we'll actually walk through like some of these building blocks along with the demo itself. So we'll start off with the very first thing, right? We have like four building blocks that we'll talk about today. So we have like agents, we have integrations, we have knowledge bases, and we have skills, right? So without much further ado, let's actually talk to Aiden. So what I'm showing you here is the web interface for Aiden. Aiden's also available as a Slack interface if like that's how you prefer. So you can basically add Aiden into your Slack workspace and like start talking to it just as you would to any other teammate. But yeah, today for the sake of this demo, I'll be using the web interface. So like the best way to introduce Aiden is just ask Aiden itself, right? So let me just very quickly go and ask Aiden to say hi, all right? So what you'll see is like Aiden, the way that we have built out the system is like it says a friendly DevOps Copilot, and it's here to assist you with all things DevOps, right? There's a whole bunch of things that Aiden can do that is powered primarily by this agentic system that we have built out, along with a whole bunch of things that we have done specifically for getting LLMs to work in the DevOps workspace, right? So we'll start off with like a very simple example, right? We'll talk about integrations first, right? Most of the time, right, if you're talking to any system, let's say you're talking to ChatGPT, you're talking to Claude, you're talking to any other system, the primary problem that you would have is that it is not actionable in any way, right? What that means is that ChatGPT gives you an answer in text, but it's not really talking to your systems. It doesn't really understand your context. It doesn't understand your tools. It doesn't understand your team. It doesn't understand your structure, the structure within which you're asking that question, right? And to put it in one simple sentence, it doesn't have any context, right? So with Aiden, what we wanted to do is like provide context, and the context that we provide to it is in multiple ways, right? The first way that we do it is by providing it with integrations, right? What integrations basically allow Aiden to do is to communicate with different components within your system. Like Tero mentioned at the start, most organizations actually have a lot of these tools, right? It's never going to be just one tool that you're using. So you probably have some tool that you use for observability. You have some, in fact, multiple tools for observability. You'd have like some tool that you use for like paging systems. You'd use some tool for alerting. You'd use some tool for CI/CD. You'd probably have a few databases in the mix. You'd have like something else doing like orchestration. You'd probably have like Kubernetes or something else. You'd have obviously have your clouds. You'd have AWS or GCP or Azure or something like that, right? So with Aiden, what you can actually do is like come off the bat and just integrate with all of these systems, right? So irrespective of whether you're using databases, whether you have like different deployment environments, OpsVerse's own observability system, Observe Now, Loki, some of these log-based systems, you can kind of integrate with a whole bunch of these systems off the bat, right? And these integrations are actually very straightforward integration. They're basically like if there is a URL, it's a URL, an API key, or a token, or a secret that you have to kind of configure, right? And once you have that, within 30 seconds up and running, Aiden is able to use that as a source of information for answering queries, right? So let me actually take a very quick example, all right? So let me actually ask Aiden. So it's a question that like probably like most people have at some point like wondered, right? Like, oh, how many EC? I'm trying to find some information about my EC2 instances, right? So what I'm trying to do is like I'm just asking Aiden like how many EC2 instances are in stop state right now, right? And under the hood, like I spoke about at the start, what Aiden actually does is it has a bunch of agents that work under it. And what Aiden is doing behind the scenes is trying to actually send information to these different agents and try to gather information, right? So you'd see like something that very, very commonly you'd see when you're trying to grow these systems, which is something that most systems don't handle today, which is like making assumptions, right? And LLMs are notorious for making assumptions. So this is something that we have worked on very hard at, like when you're building out Aiden, is to get it to clarify questions just the way that any other engineer within your team would ask, right? So here it's like specifically saying that, hey, it's saying you said you want to get EC2 instance information, but I need to understand like the EC2 instance are always region specific. So can you please give me that information, right? So let's actually do our favorite US East one, right? So we'll actually see like what's going on. We're actually going to go back with that information that we have. Again, the way that Aiden works, it's not really, you don't have to give it all the context every single time. It can actually manage a conversational flow and understand, hey, like the question that you asked me, this is the clarification that I asked. Now you have like asked me or given me some more information. So this is what I need to do. So now it says like, okay, there's one EC2 instance that's in stop state in the US East 1 region and it's given an instance ID, right? Now, something that obviously most DevOps teams would do is like now try to identify it's in stop state, can I terminate it? But like maybe I need to find out who exactly owns this, right? So I can actually go ahead and just ask Aiden itself to do that, right? I'll say like, so I'm just telling it to go look at the tags and see who the owner of this instance is, right? So again, under the hood, what Aiden is doing is it's using the context that's there from this conversation. It knows you. I don't really need to tell it. Can you tell me who the owner of instance I hyphen 09496 188 B36A is? So yeah, here you see like Aiden has actually gone and it's taken the context from the previous conversation. It sees looked at a tag and it says that the owner for this is payments team, right? So now actually what I can do is like just using this conversational interface without ever having to use AWS CLI, without having to log into AWS console, any of that. Just because I've configured Aiden to talk to AWS, I can actually do a whole bunch of things that I want, right? But now this is like a very straightforward kind of example, right? Where you're saying that, oh, I have an AWS system that I have. And what I want to do is like, I want to like get some information about whatever, right? Whether I want to get information about IAM policies, or I want to get information about VPCs, or I want to get information about some of these other systems that I have, right? So now, what again makes Aiden different from a lot of other systems, right? One more example that I'll give that will talk a little bit more about that is, like I said, Aiden is actually always learning about how you do things, right? And that means that every conversation that you have, Aiden is also internally running a feedback loop where it's trying to understand what it can pick up, and exactly the way that you'd work with any other member within your DevOps team, right? It's not that every single time you have to give like enough context to a DevOps team member to like function. What you do is like the first time you probably have to give a little bit more context. The team then understands, learns, inculcates that knowledge, and then going forward what ends up happening is like you'll actually see more and more use cases where you don't have to give that context, right? And I'll show a very quick example of this, right? So this is like one organization that I have that's running Aiden, and I have another organization that's running Aiden here in this incognito window, right? And let me actually ask the exact same question to Aiden, but we'll see like how the answers differ depending on like the context that it has of different organizations, right? So let me give. So yeah, I'm gonna say like give me sample IAC code for creating a VPC, and I'm actually gonna go into. I'm not even gonna like type it out again. I'll just copy paste it, right? So it actually see. Okay, here it's saying like it's giving. Okay, let's say in this case US East 1. And here you see, yeah, it's actually generated a VPC template for me. What it's done is it's actually gone and created a CloudFormation template to create this VPC for me, and it's created a whole bunch of things that I need. But here, if I go into this, right, it's the same query that I had, but you'll see that in this case, what Aiden has done is it's generated Terraform instead, right? The query remains the same, but these two organizations that are there, one has constantly been asking Aiden questions about Terraform. The knowledge base that Aiden has generated for this organization knows that this organization uses Terraform, right? So at no point do I have to say, can you actually generate Terraform code for me, right? Aiden intrinsically understands that this organization is using Terraform, this organization uses like CloudFormation. So despite the query being exactly the same, and you'll see like a lot of the characteristics will be exactly the same of like the base content, base template that it generates. But at the same time, what it's actually going to do, it's like it's actually going to customize it based on the knowledge that it has of your organization, right? Now, this actually becomes very, very interesting because what it means is that Aiden now becomes like a self-learning system, right? What you see for Aiden on day one is different from what how performant Aiden is going to be on day 10. It's going to be different on how performant Aiden is going to be on day 100, right? And that's why like we feel that the value add of Aiden for a lot of organizations is in kind of integrating it with a lot of different systems so that Aiden can build this knowledge base for itself, right? And the example that we give, the analogy that we give is always exactly the same. It's just like how you have a teammate within your team. Say you have a new person who's joined your team. Initially, you'll have to tell that teammate, hey, like this is where my GitHub repo is. This is where we store our GitOps code. Oh, this is what we use for alerting. This is the system that we use for actually like fixing issues, right? This is like where we go when we want to look at logs. Oh, we actually always, all our EC2 instances have a certain context that we have a certain set of labels. So you can use those labels for debugging. And over time what happens is that engineer is learning these things and being able to use that information for answering future queries that you have. And the same way Aiden is also able to like pick up this information and creating like a self-learning loop, right? So far like we've seen like two use cases that we have with Aiden. Like one is it fits within like the integrations and the agentic framework that Aiden kind of follows, right? And the second thing that the example that we spoke about was about knowledge bases, right? How Aiden creates a self-setting up knowledge base that like always keeps improving upon itself, right? And again, the way that we've built Aiden as a system is that every time you do an integration, it's another source of information for Aiden to actually learn from. And that means that basically the more systems that you integrate Aiden with, the more information that it has to use off of. And again, just like any other engineer within your organization, when Aiden is confused, it will always come back. It won't make assumptions. It'll come back and ask, hey, like it looks like you're asking me this query, but I'm not sure how I do that, right? And that's always been the North Star for us. Is like exactly we want to build Aiden exactly as a teammate would operate, right? And that's why it's not going to make assumption. It's not going to like use any sort of inbuilt knowledge. It's always building off of the knowledge that it knows about your organization, right? So now I'll get into the next step, which is like our skills framework, right? And that's something that I think a lot of DevOps teams kind of struggle with, right? Especially when trying to implement generative AI solutions. Skills is like workflows, right? You can look at it as workflows, and most DevOps teams have like some set of workflow that they follow, right? So, for example, if I had to ask people on the chat right now, right, on the call right now, like what are the policies that you have within your AWS, for example, right? I'm sure that like what I would have within my organization would be different from what you have, would be different from what some third person has, right? Similarly, if I say like when I create an EC2 instance, like what are the kind of rules that I need to follow, right? What my organization follows would be different from what your organization follows, would be different from what some other third organization follows, right? So with Aiden, when we're building out Aiden, one thing that we wanted to do very early on was build out a system where Aiden is actually able to we're able to encapsulate workflows, right? And that workflow captures we do through this system that we call skills, right? Which is the third thing that I'll talk about today in this demo. So with the skills framework, what we're trying to do is like say that you have a repeatable workflow, right? And in some cases, it's going to be a repeatable workflow that Aiden itself identifies. In some cases, it's going to be a repeatable workflow that you as an engineer or a DevOps engineer within your team identifies and like lets Aiden know, right? And what you can basically do is like, let me actually quickly show a demo and like then we can talk about what Aiden does under the hood, right? So, um, so I'm going to like very quickly ask this question. I'm going to say, please run a policy check for an AWS account, right? So behind the scenes, what's happening here is that we have actually configured a skill for Aiden, and I'll just show in a minute how these skills get configured, right? And what happens under the hood is that Aiden actually identifies that when you're asking me to do this, it's not just about me trying to go and figure out a random set of policies and then check whether they are complied, right? But there's an explicit skill, an explicit workflow of like what you want me to do. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to actually understand what that workflow is and then go behind the scenes and understand what are the commands that I need to run, and then basically like come back, run those commands for you, run it, follow everything that's there, and then summarize the results for you in a way that is completely workable for me, right? And very quickly, I can actually show what a skill looks like. Okay, it looks like Aiden has already come back, right? Yeah, it says that we have the analysis for the S3 buckets has revealed a non-compliance, and it says that public access and encryption settings for new Aiden new project bucket are compliant. That's like the requirement for all the buckets to be in US East 1, right? So let's actually see like what's the thing, right? And you can see here at the bottom, it says that it uses a skill called AWS S3 policy checker, right? So let's actually see what it said, right? What that policy actually means. So let's see basically here, it says like use the AWS expert, which is like one of the agents that Aiden has access to. And it says that the things that it has to do is it has to make sure that the bucket's name have to start with OpsVerse hyphen something. The no bucket should be public. All buckets should be in US East 1 and all S3 buckets should be encrypted, right? And if you look at the response that AWS has, that Aiden has come up with, you'll see that it's actually come up with the one bucket that does not comply with that, right? It says that as the Aiden new project bucket, which does not go within the US East 1. Oh, it looks like everything is in US East 1, but it doesn't comply with the naming convention, right? Aiden new project bucket doesn't actually comply with the naming convention, right? So what you can actually do now is like build out these skills as per your requirements, right? If you notice, at no point have I told in the skill like what the command is. I've not told it what is this, how do you run this with AWS CLI. I don't give it like any steps like that. I just tell it in plain English what I wanted to do every time I ask for a policy check. And Aiden internally goes ahead and like identifies what are the commands that need to be run, runs it for you, and then comes out with a complete analysis of like what needs to be done, right? So like this is like one thing that we have found very very useful when it comes to this. Again, like I said, I'll very quickly we can see how you'd create a skill. So it actually just say like create a custom skill. You'd give it a name, you'd give it a description, and the way that each skill works today is that you have a bunch of steps that you can create, right? And like I said, you can actually have Aiden go to different agents depending on what it wants to do under the hood. So you can say like, oh, I want to go to Argo CD and like do this, and then I want to go to logs and do this, and then I want to go to then I want to go to some other system and do this, right? And I can actually go to all of these different systems and like encapsulate all of these as steps, right? Other thing that I mentioned is very commonly that we have seen happen is that if you keep asking Aiden the same kind of question repeatedly, the same kind of workflow, if the conversation always follows question one, question two, question three, question one, question two, question three, in the same format, asking for the same information, then Aiden at some point will also be able to suggest to you, saying that, hey, like you seem to often ask these same questions. So do you want to capture all of this into a skill, right? And it knows because it's done the execution a few times, it kind of knows exactly what the agents are that are required. It knows what the steps need to be to actually perform the skill and actually go ahead and like perform those skills for you, right? You can see a few of these skills that we've seen, ranging from like things like just getting DevOps news, right, which is a very simplistic kind of skill that you have, to we can actually do like more advanced skills as well, right? Can be configured with it. So while we get this right, I think like something that comes up very very often that like people ask about is that, hey, like so we have the skills framework that is there, we have this knowledge framework that we spoke about, we have like the integrations that we spoke about, right? So like how do all of these kind of tie in together? All right, so that is like kind of where like we come into a more advanced kind of use cases, right? And this is something that we've seen. The building blocks that we've built for Aiden are like very simple or like sound very simple, right? But I think the it's actually been like very hard to maintain that simplicity, and the reason for like maintaining that quote unquote simplicity at the surface but the complexity under the hood is because it kind of allows us to do like much more advanced use cases, right? And one example that I'd like to show today is like something that I'm sure that most people in DevOps teams have seen, right? Let's say that you have an outage, right? And you have an outage for some system, or like some system is acting up, let's say. Very often, like most we've seen like in organizations, irrespective of whether they're like small startups or they're like large enterprise companies, right? Very often what ends up happening is there'll be like one person who's been at the organization for like 5 or 6 years, and everyone, all the junior engineers kind of like create this nice group and go to that engineer and say like, hey, this service is acting up, can you let me know what is happening, right? So let me talk about this example while we actually have Aiden running a RCA for us, right? So running into issues. Hmm. Yeah, so I'm saying like tech order service is running into issues. Can you analyze and find the root cause of the issue, right? So now just think about what the workflow would be if the same question is asked to an engineer within your team, right? Like I said, more often than not, there is some intrinsic knowledge that the team has. For example, you'd know that, oh, the tech order service, it uses this old database that we actually have been using. We have wanted to upgrade for a while, but no one's really used it. And we've seen it have resource issues in the past. So maybe that's one place to look, right? Another place to look maybe, hey, like I know that we use like some logging system. So I can go to the logging system and see like, is there any issue with the log generation that is there for the tech order service, right, that I have. The third use case that I have is, oh, I have like some other system. I'll go to Argo CD and check whether deployment was done recently, right? Maybe there's a deployment done, or maybe a Jenkins pipeline ran, maybe there's Jenkins failure. Or tech order service actually talks to some third party payment system, right? Or like talk to some third party system. Maybe the third party system is at fault, right? It may not actually be my system at fault, but it may be some third party system that's at fault. And how can I actually debug this, right? So there'll be like a whole bunch of these tools that you'd have, and you'd actually go step by step, right? You'd go to this tool one, you'd figure out what is happening there. You'd go to tool two, you'd like figure out what is happening there. You then go to the third source of information, right? Source of telemetry that you have, and you'd actually come in and actually get to that information. So here you'd actually see what is happening here, right? So we actually have like an info that's coming. So it comes in and it says that, okay, the first thing that it's done, it says that you said tech order service, but I don't really know what tech order service is. That seems to be it seems to be the application. The service name is text or order service, right? Which is correct in many ways, right? The tech order service is how we'd probably refer to it. But yeah, Aiden understands that you don't have to give it an exact name. It can actually figure out through fuzzy matching what exactly the application that you're talking to is. And it says, oh, these are the applications that are running. These are the values that I have. It says APM health was checked, and it says that, oh, I looked at the logs to identify errors. It looks at the metrics. It identified this. It looked for the firing errors. And it said like, yeah, the analysis actually involved checking everything, and it's actually come to you, right? And if you see again, what we have done here is actually it's gone to all of these different systems to give you like output right at the end of it, and it's telling you that things seem to be fine. Obviously, like the system was just an example, but you can see that looks to be fine. But the reason that it's been able to actually go to all of these systems is again because I have a skill configured, right? And you'd see the skill actually has different steps that it goes to, right? It actually goes to a whole bunch of different systems. It can actually collect all that information for you, and rather than your engineer spending time trying to actually go to all of these systems, you ask Aiden a question, and literally in like 1.5 minutes you kind of have all this initial debugging done for you. If there was an error, it would actually also tell you, hey, like this is the root cause that I think the error is. This is where I think like this may be the cause. Oh, there's a deployment that happened recently, that may be somewhere to look into. If it's not able to figure out the issue, it will also come up with hypotheses for you, right? And that is exactly how you would work with any other senior engineer within your org, right? You kind of expect your senior engineers to, if not be able to fix an issue, then at least tell you where to look, right? Tell you like where are the most likely cases where things may be broken, right? So that again is like an example of like how you're able to like actually use these simple building blocks that we have of like agents, integrations, skills, and knowledge bases, and kind of bring them all together, right? And create like these kind of workflows that you have. Again, like I said, a lot of what Aiden does is customizable to your organization. So depending on the number of people who use it, depending on how many source of information it can actually talk to, some of these things Aiden can actually figure out by itself. In some cases, it does require a little bit of hand holding. And it's then, like I said, the North Star for us is treating Aiden like a teammate that you have within your team, right? And as long as people feel that this is what how Aiden is actually able to work and it's able to provide value, I think we have done our job well, right? So I'll get back very quickly to the slides that I had. Something that very comes up very commonly, right, when we talk about Aiden is security, right? How exactly does Aiden manage security? When you're talking about LLMs and you're talking about DevOps data, it's obviously going to be very security becomes like paramount, right? And more so than like most other use cases for LLMs, I'd assume. So we actually manage security in like multiple aspects, right? Again, like I said, we are at OpsVerse, we're a bunch of DevOps engineers who have like between us probably like 50, 60 years of DevOps experience, right? And we actually have understand like requirements for enterprises. So that's why like while we do the common steps of like right at the bottom, you see like we do SOC 2, we do auditing, we actually have a very deterministic data access flow for Aiden as well, right? What that means is that we are not actually going to the LLM and telling it, can you please access some data source, right? What we actually do is like because of our understanding of Aiden, especially with Aiden 2.0, a lot of rework that we've done is to make sure that every data that is actually accessed in a deterministic manner. And that means that what we are sending to the LLM is more about like outsourcing the reasoning for the LLM, right? We're kind of trying to go to the LLM and say, how would you reason about this problem, right? Tell me the steps that you'd follow, and then those steps are actually deterministically followed by Aiden without actually sending that data to the LLM, like in most cases, right? But at the same time, we do understand that enterprises will always be shaky about like trusting security in general, right? So that's why like Aiden is something that, as with everything else that we do at OpsVerse, can be hosted as private SaaS. And what that means is that Aiden can actually run completely within a customer's VPC as well, right? And along with that, because of the model that we do for deployments, we can support shared nothing deployments. That means that what your Aiden processes, what your Aiden instance process is completely unique to your organization and no other organization's data, right? At the same time, we do also support like other use cases. We do support like BYOK, which means bring your own LLM key. For most common LLMs, we do support like BYOK kind of use cases. At the same time, like something that we also support is like BYOLLM, right? Which basically means we've had some customers who have wanted to not send their data out to OpenAI or Google or Claude or any other external provider, but they're comfortable bringing in their own LLM, right? They want to actually host their LLM within their own VPC and use Aiden as to use that LLM as a backend, which kind of encapsulates all their data within the customer boundary, right? And that's again something that that we do support out of the box. Very recently, as of like just yesterday, given the news with like DeepSeek and R1, that's like something that we're also betaing, right? Trying to see like newer models as they come in, how quickly we can like actually support those as well. The third thing that we support like RBAC, right? And I think this is something that, especially with LLM workflows, is going to be like very critical, not just for OpsVerse or for Aiden, but for pretty much anyone building in the space. How people used to think about RBAC when they were talking about SaaS is very different in how we're talking about RBAC when you're talking about like generative AI workflows, right? So with Aiden, what we have done is like we have done very early ground up rethinking of RBAC systems and how they would work, right? What would RBAC look like in an LLM based workflow. And that, like I mentioned at the start, does involve like trying to make sure that all the data access as much as possible is deterministic. We don't want to go to the LLM, get to the point where we're like looking at like prompt poisoning, or getting to the point where like we have some of these external security risks that may come in, right? So RBAC is something that is we've actually thought of from the ground up, right? And obviously this means like since we have been working with Aiden over the last year and a half, 2 years, right, that I've spoken about, we have a lot of improvements that we've brought into Aiden, just to make it the system that it is today, right? And some of these things are like maybe like very commonly heard buzzwords within the generative AI space. So, for example, like people talk a lot about RAG, like retrieval augmented generation. But how does retrieval augmented generation work when you're trying to work with like metrics, right? When you're trying to actually work with some sort of data that can go to the millions of data points, right? That's some of the problems that we've actually had to work with. Oh, how do you talk? We've very commonly heard about people talk about like memory, right? Having LLMs with memory. But how does memory actually work when you're talking about LLMs where you're working with a system that works with different teams, right? Where like the services that one team uses may not be the same as the services another team uses, right? So some of these things are like things that we've had to actually think from the ground up. Storing knowledge, actually being able to like build out different agents, building out systems that like building out a system that's extensible while at the same time not being completely open, right? These are some of the problems that we've actually worked on Aiden, over the last 2 years, right? And that's why we feel like very confident about being ready to like be presented at like really large scale, right? And finally, of course, like some of these things that I demoed are very quickly are building blocks, and we are very, very clear that like it's day one for Aiden, right? Despite the fact that we do feel so right now we have gotten a lot of like great responses from initial customers that have been playing around with Aiden over the last few days, just looking at the number of signups that we've had, seeing the kind of questions that people have been asking Aiden, seeing the kind of integrations that they're done, seeing the kind of value adds and skills that they've been creating, right? It's been like great to see that number go up constantly, which means that we do see like Aiden adding value. But at the same time, there are a bunch of things that we want to do, right? So we have like some things that are coming soon. We have like scheduled tasks and triggers, smart boards, which is like dashboards powered by Aiden. Remote runners is like something else that we're working on. Embedded RBAC, like I mentioned, RBAC is something that very, very critical for especially enterprise use cases for LLMs, and like RBAC we are very deeply working about. Multiple modalities. So today we spoke about the web modality, but besides that, we also have the Slack modality. We have the Teams modality coming out soon. We have browser plugin, a backstage plugin coming out. So depending on where you're using, irrespective of what kind of modality you want to use Aiden in, you'll be able to use it wherever you work, right? We want to embed Aiden wherever you work. And finally, yeah, like we have a lot more integrations that are coming in. So we have about, I think about 20 integrations right now to most common DevOps tools. But the idea is like to constantly grow that. And at the same time, also provide like a custom agent framework, which will allow teams to like actually build out their own agents for Aiden, right? They'll be able to integrate their own internal systems into Aiden. And this again came in purely from like enterprise customers wanting to built out like internal systems that they want to like bring into Aiden, bring knowledge into Aiden, right? So that custom agent framework is something else that we'll bring up. And of course, there's going to be a lot more things. So really, really excited about like where we are with Aiden. I'm really, really happy to see the value add that we're seeing with Aiden, that we are able to like see so many people like use Aiden in so many interesting ways. And I hope that like this demo was like enough to like pique your interest for a lot more people. And I hope like you'll sign up and try out Aiden soon. Back to you, Tero.
So yeah, thanks for that, Naveen. We have a bunch of questions actually coming up, right? And I think we'll take a few minutes to answer those. So a couple of questions that we have seen is we have questions coming in on LinkedIn as well as on StreamYard. So you talk about the security aspects and all, right? One of the question we have here is like hosting Aiden. Like, what is the model available, right? Can they host it within the environment? Can they self-host it or not?
Perfect, right? So at OpsVerse, we actually support like multiple models, and like I spoke about it a few minutes back, right? We do support a SaaS mode where you basically come in and you just sign up just like you would for any other SaaS application and use Aiden. But at the same time, if you're like an enterprise customer and you're very concerned about the LLM API keys that you have, or you're like trying to actually the LLM API keys that you're trying to use, or you want to even host your own LLM, right? Then these are also models that we do support. We can actually host Aiden completely within your VPC as well. So especially if you're running AWS, EKS, when you're running like AWS or Azure or GCP, we can actually launch Aiden completely as a managed solution, but that runs completely within your VPC, and can also use a LLM that either uses like your LLM API keys, or if you're using some third-party LLM provider, or actually even host the LLM internally as well, right? So we do have a lot of flexibility in terms of the deployment model. And primarily, I think that's been built out from day one because, like I said, we are enterprise DevOps engineers ourselves, and we understand like where that need for security comes from, right? Yeah, it's the
Great.
most common question that we get, but yeah, that's why we built it out from scratch for day one.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions coming in from Sushanka. One of the question he has is like, I believe this question came in when you were actually asking question to Aiden, and it was taking a little bit time to respond to that, right? So the question is out there on the screen. The observation from him is for many queries, Aiden takes a lot of time, even though our domain is limited to DevOps, right? That's a very interesting question. Do you want to like answer that one?
Absolutely, right. There's like multiple reasons for that. Some of them is like obviously, some of them are definitely like I think improvements that we have on our side, right? That we have to make in terms of like making Aiden more performant. But at the same time, like I think the reason some of these decisions that we have taken when we're building out Aiden is also because in many cases, what Aiden is doing, it's not just running a query and getting a response and sending it out, right? It's also in some cases like reasoning about like what it needs to do. Like I said, we don't want the LLM to decide what needs to be done, but it's coming out with reasoning steps. It's coming out with like what are the next steps that it'll do, how would it approach the problem, and then like run some queries. Then it also runs like a loop where it's like verifying the responses that it has, right? So that's like the reason why, yeah, there's like some, like I said, the right answer to that lies somewhere in the middle of like we need to get better, and some of these are like engineering decisions we have taken specifically for DevOps use cases where we do have to verify our responses as well. We cannot just throw it's very fast to like do a single API call to an LLM and come back with whatever response it gives and say this is my answer, right? But yeah, we have taken the action item to like actually reason a lot more about that answer. And in some cases, yeah, I understand that for very simple use cases, it does seem like Aiden takes way longer than it should. But I think like we need to strike that middle ground somewhere, and that's something definitely the engineering team is working on right now.
Thanks, Aiden. Thanks, Naveen, as well as
Aiden.
Aiden. I think Aiden we'll be too focused on Aiden right now. The other question popping on the screen, right? This is from Damodar. And I think the question is any insights into determining user intent, right? Mainly to avoid too many back and forth cycles to get sufficient context.
Absolutely right. I think like that again comes down to that. What I spoke about initially is like Aiden's knowledge base and Aiden's skills framework, right? A lot of what we have done is like just to make sure that when you give Aiden some knowledge, or you give Aiden, or you're like when you're trying to create a skill for Aiden, right? You create it in the language that you're most comfortable in, right? You create it in simple English. You don't really give commands. You don't really give it too much information about your intent, and that intent generation is like it's a perfectly encapsulated thing that it's a very very hard problem to solve. But the way that we have done it is we kind of allow Aiden to actually reason a lot more about the skills that it has access to and the knowledge base it has access to, and fine tune the skills over time, right? So even if you have given it a skill that explicitly says ABC, and there's a very similar skill saying like CDE, right? What we want Aiden to do over time is understand that ABC fits under certain use cases, CDE fits under other use cases. So when you ask a question, it should be able to bucket better, right? In no way am I saying like, because in general, like I think bucketing or like classification in general or user intent identification is like a huge problem across not just DevOps or Gen AI, but in classical ML as well, right? So there's a lot of work that we have done, because one thing that's allowed us to be a little bit easier, been a little easier for us, is the domain boundedness of Eden. But at the same time, yeah, there is a lot more work for us to do in terms of like making sure that the user intent is always picked correctly, right? I'd say like right now at this point, we're at this point where more often than not, or maybe an 80-90% time, we are able to like get that right. But more often than not, what we want Aiden to do, like any other teammate, is like come back and ask you for a clarifying question when it's confused, right? Rather than make assumptions, right? I think that's a nice middle ground for us. While we do understand that sometimes it may get a little annoying to do that back and forth of question and answer, but I think like it's important for a system like Aiden to rather get clarifications and make clarifying questions than make assumptions, right? Yeah, that's something that we do. Yeah.
That's beautifully put, right? To have human in the loop. Yeah, it's good until a disaster comes in, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's again something that always people ask us, right? Like, if Aiden does something wrong, right, who's responsible, right? Is it Aiden? Is it my engineering team that built Aiden, or is it you because you configured Aiden in a way, right, or asked Aiden to do something, right? So yeah, that's
Great.
always there's a lot of philosophical questions there as well, but yeah, I won't dive into those now. Like,
Yeah, we are slightly over time. We'll just take maybe one more question. We like so many questions, so little time. So we will definitely get back to all of this question either on LinkedIn. Those who are like asking question on StreamYard, we'll be sending you emails with all the Q&A for all of our visitors today. So the next question we have is from Ajay. And the question is, the knowledge of Aiden to respond comprehensively is dependent on the breadth and depth of skill. How does the user of the system know what capabilities Aiden already supports versus something that is not supported yet? Basically, to what extent does the end user have to know how extensive your integrations skills are to assess the comprehensiveness of the answers provided? That's a beautiful question. I think you answered some of it, but
Yeah,
yeah, if you want to.
I'll actually answer this question, and I think like the reason why I love this question is because like I've spent the better half of like we spent a better half a month like asking the same question, right? Like I think that's something that's very common with LLMs is they never say no, right? You ask an LLM anything under the sun, right? It'll always come back with, oh, like can you solve nuclear fusion for me? And it'll come back with an answer that solves an, can you prove P equals NP, right? It'll come up with a nice long proof for you or say something else. But it's very, very hard for an LLM or a GenAI application in general to be able to say that it doesn't know something, right? And for us, actually, there's a lot of work that's gone into, and you can try that out. Right? I'd actually suggest Ajay, like do try out some of these workflows that you have where you're trying to ask Aiden to do things that it cannot do, right? And we've built Aiden in a way that when it cannot do something, we'd rather have it come back and say, hey, like I don't know how to do this. And I think there's a standardized response that it gives saying like, hey, I don't know how to do this, and would you like me to like send this as feedback to the OpsVerse team, right? So they can figure out how to help you with this, rather than actually come up with like something that does not make sense at all, right? The second part of the question that you have is like about skills, right? How extensive do your skills and integrations have to be? And this is again like I think like for most systems that we have, if you make the requirement of like creating a skill compulsory, right, for a lot of use cases, then people would simply not use the system, right? But the way we see Aiden is like the skills are like an add-on on top of it. Like I said, they're a building block that you're building on top of, right? You should be able to actually have a communication with Aiden and get most of your queries resolved, or like have the next step at least in terms of where you want to resolve it. But with skills, what we want to do is like have people like create skills in whatever language they are comfortable with, right? You don't actually have to go too deep in terms of skills. We've seen like a lot of times people actually create skills with just one step, but it has 10 different things that it needs Aiden to do under the hood, right? And Aiden actually figures out that, oh, it's like one step, but I need to do multiple things, and it'll go and do it for you. But at the same time, we do understand that people over time have understood that skills kind of are one of those systems that get better the more you use it, right? The more you kind of understand how to create skills, the more your team actually figures out, oh, like this, when I do this, then Aiden does X, when I do this, Aiden does Y, right? And it's like a constant back and forth that is happening between Aiden and the team that is like building these skills to kind of keep that conversation going on, so that like you get to a point where your team doesn't find creating a skill too cumbersome, but at the same time Aiden knows enough context about an organization to actually be able to perform tasks without having like too much information in a skill, right? So it's that middle ground that we are always trying to thread, where yeah, that's like probably the best way I can answer it. That middle ground is like something that we always want to thread, where it's neither too easy and you just assume that yeah, Aiden is going to do everything by itself, but at the same time it's not something that is going to be like, oh, I have to create a skill now, I'm not going to use Aiden, right? That's the other extreme, right? And we want to be somewhere in the middle along those two ends that we have.
Great, thanks, Naveen. There is one more question which I was just skimming through, and like this is very interesting, and I think it will help all of our DevOps engineers, especially like who are attending this session today. I'll just bring it up on the screen, so if you can look into it and quickly answer. This came from Pragadesh. Can Aiden is capable of changing the build scripts of CI, right, according to the uses of live projects, right? This is a very, very interesting one, and by adding it in the custom skills. So if yes, it can save a lot of time for DevOps engineers, right? Yeah. Do you want to maybe
Absolutely, right? Like I think broadly, like as an organization, right, do understand like a lot of the time for like DevOps teams is spent in two components, right? One like the CI/CD system that you'd work on, the other is probably observability system, right? And that is a lot of time spent, right? And we have like a lot of tools that are there within both the CI/CD space as well as the observability space. With Aiden, absolutely, this is like one. It's a great use case for Aiden, and like something that we very, very passionately talk about when we're talking to customers as well, right? Like being able to like actually change build scripts, being able to like create build script, or even something as simple as saying that, hey, like there's this one Jenkins pipeline I have, create one more for project X, right? I don't really want an engineer to go and like spend 30 minutes, an hour of their time creating that new build script that you want, right? These are all things that Aiden can do. The only thing that the place where the constraint comes in is in terms of the tools and the integrations, right? So if you're talking about like something common that you're using, like if you're talking about like Jenkins, if you're talking about like Argo CD or like some of these very common tools, right? Then the integrations for these exist out of the box. But if you're like actually talking about something that's a little bit more custom, then it's just about us getting the bandwidth, or our team having the bandwidth to be able to build that agent, or like I said in the presentation, being able to provide that custom agent framework that you can then build an integration on top of, right? But this is something that absolutely, right, it's a place that most DevOps engineers hate spending their time on. And anything that engineers hate spending their time on is something that's like a core use case for Aiden, right? We do want to make sure that like DevOps engineers, like I said, add value to their organization rather than do work that no one else wants to do, right? So yeah, great question. Yeah.
That actually is one of the reasons why we build Aiden, right? What if there was a way to lighten the load, right? And a great question, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. I know we are over time. I really appreciate you guys spending time and exploring how Aiden is revolutionizing DevOps. This is just the beginning of what's possible with an AI Copilot by your side. If you're excited, as we are, head over to OpsVerse.io/Aiden to explore more, or simply scan the QR code on your screen out there. You can dive into its feature and even book a personalized demo to experience Aiden tailored to unique workflows. Let's build the future of DevOps together, faster, smarter, and simpler. Thank you again. We can't wait to see what you'll achieve with Aiden. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.